What's up, Coldbreak? It's your boy Morin G, back with another episode of Who's Ready for a Cold One? Today's episode, we're going to be taking a big, boozy, Scottish wee heavy barrel-aged winter warmer and breaking it down and simplifying it so you can brew 2 gallons of this beautiful beer on your stovetop.
Get in my belly!
What a Scottish wee heavy is, it is a big malt-forward boozy beer, usually ranging from anywhere from 8 all the way up to 15%. This is a beer that you're going to be serving in probably a snifter glass, 6 to 8 ounces, maybe 10 ounces, and having 1 or 2 of these this winter. You're not going to be drinking 5 or 6 pints of this like you are in the summertime of your favorite IPA or fruited sour beer. All right, so we're gonna step this recipe up just a little bit. We're gonna keep it very simple, but we are gonna be adding in some character grains today along with our extract. So what I did is I built my recipe in Beersmith. I put all my ingredients in. I looked at the parameters for the style guidelines, and everything lines up beautifully for this small 2-gallon batch. This is a perfect beer to brew a smaller batch of. You don't need 5 gallons of wee heavy on tap or in bottles sitting around, because this is a beer too. Again, you're going to be drinking it in very small amounts. So 2 gallons is perfect. This is also a beer that works out perfect for aging over longer periods. So if you do have extra bottles sitting around, that's okay, because it's a beer that will age well over months and years, which I've done in the past. Okay, so for this recipe, we're going to be using some character grains, like I said. Our main sugar source is going to be our Golden Light liquid malt extract. We're using 6 pounds, 9 ounces, so 2 containers of this, because it's 3 pounds, 3 ounces, so actually 6 pounds, 6 ounces of this. We're going to be adding in some character grains that we're going to steep in our water before we add in our extract to boil. So we've got 8 ounces of Munich malt. We got 8 ounces of caramel 40. We got 4 ounces of honey malt. We got 4 ounces of caramel 120. And we have 2 ounces of pale chocolate malt. Now, pale chocolate makes it sound like it's going to add a lot of chocolatey flavors to this beer. It's not. This pale chocolate, this 2 ounces of this malt is going to give it that beautiful ruby red, almost light brown color that we're looking for in this beer. So what we're going to do is we're going to be milling up these grains, and we're going to be adding them into a grain sock or a grain bag that we're going to steep into our water at about 156 degrees for about 20 minutes before we bring it up to boil to add in the rest of our sugar. This is going to add in those character flavors and aromas and color before we add in the rest of our sugars to boil. All right, so hopefully you're ready to make this awesome beer, and I'm even going to teach you some ways in secondary how to add in some oak wood flavor to this big boozy beer to give it that barrel-aged character without actually having to use an oak barrel. All right, get your materials ready, and let's get to work and brew this beautiful Scottish wee heavy. So as we prepare for our brew day, it's great to always get all of your materials out and ready to go prior to, so you're not scrambling around in between steps trying to find certain materials. So I've got everything out here that I need. I got my boil kettle. I've got my Star San, which we'll need post boil for anything that touches the beer. We want to make sure all our equipment's sanitized. We have all of our grains. So we've got our liquid malt extract. We got all those character grains that we talked about earlier. We got our grain sock. So if you are still brewing in a kit beer, so if you ordered a kit beer from your local homebrew store, or ordered your wee heavy kit from online, it's going to have everything in there for you. It's going to have your character grains and your liquid malt extract, but those character grains are already going to be milled for you. So they'll probably send you a grain sock like this. So what you're going to do is you're going to take those character grains and you're going to open up this grain sock, and you're going to put all those character grains that are already milled inside of this sock like this mesh sock, and you're going to tie it off, and you're going to steep it in your in your boil kettle, which I'm going to show you here in a minute. The other thing you can do too is you can also buy a permanent grain bag, which you can use over and over again. You can clean this when you're done, and you can use it for multiple brews. These grain socks are a one and done. You use them once, then you throw them away. It's up to you. I like to use a permanent grain bag when I'm doing this because I want to use it multiple times down the road. These grain socks are only like 50 cents or $1 at your local store when you buy them. So again, too, it's up to you however you want to go about that process. We got our hops. Today we're going to be using 2 ounces of East Kent Goldings. We're going to use 1 ounce for 60 minutes for our bittering hops. And we're going to also add in 1 ounce at 10 minutes to go in the boil to give it a little bit more of that character. We got our Whirlfloc tablet, which is going to help with some clarification at the end of the boil. Some yeast nutrient, which is again going to build up that environment for the yeast to do its job. And then we're just using a very clean SO5 American ale yeast. We don't need any really big yeast characteristics and flavor in this beer because all of our character grains and our sugars, we want that malt forwardness. So we're just using a clean, very basic ale yeast to ferment through. We got our little 3-gallon fermenter here, which is all we're going to need. We're brewing a final batch volume of 2 gallons of beer, but we're going to start with a 3-gallon total volume, and then we're going to boil off some of that through the brew day. We're also going to lose some of that when we're going from primary to secondary and the aging process. So we got everything we need here. Let's get our water volume filled up in our boil kettle and get that up to temperature so that we can steep in our character grains. My grains I bought at the homebrew store are in whole grain form. At your homebrew store, when you buy these character grains, you can always mill them right at your homebrew store. They will have hand crank mills and they will have electric mills that you can dump them into. I have my own grain mill here at home, so I always like to keep my grains in whole kernel form as long as possible, and I mill them right before I'm ready to put them in to ensure the most fresh grains possible. So let's get these grains milled up. Let's get them steeping in our water, and let's head on over to the stovetop to start this brew day. Okay, for the small 2-gallon batch of beer, we're going to start off with a total volume of 3 gallons of total water in our boil kettle. So we've got a half-gallon pitcher here. So let's do the math. If we want 3 gallons, we're going to need 6 of these half gallons in our boil kettle to start off. So we're just going to use our just standard tap water here. We're going to fill up 6 of these bad boys, pour them in, and I'm going to add in 1 Campton tablet. I'm going to crush that up and add that into our boil kettle because that Campton tablet is going to help take a little bit of that chlorine flavor additives that are in our just tap water. It's going to help take some of that chlorine out of that normal tap water. So that's 1. We're going to count 6 of these total as we add them in to our kettle. So we're going to raise this initial temperature on our kettle up to 156 degrees. Why 156 degrees? 156 degrees is a perfect kind of mash temperature to steep these grains at for a beer that you want to have a full body flavor to. So when you're finally, eventually, at some point, if you're going to continue to brew, that's 2 of these, remember, if you're going to continue to brew, you're eventually going to move in from extract to an all grain system. It's just kind of the nature of the beast as brewers evolve in their brewing career. Okay, all grain is going to give you a lot more flavor profiles to experiment with. Extract is wonderful because it keeps it very simple. That's our 3rd one. I like to count because I'll lose track. Extract is awesome because it keeps it very simple and basic on your stovetop. But eventually, if you want to continue to brew, you're going to move into all grain because, like I showed you with those steeping grains, there are hundreds of grains that you get to work with that are going to be able to dial in more specific flavors when you get into more complex beers. I love brewing extract batches. That's 4. You get great flavors, and you can still brew beautiful beers right here on your stovetop. Very simple with extract, but it does limit you in what you can do when you want to move into more complex flavored beers. So we got 2 more. We got 1 more gallon left, or 2 more of these half-gallon pitchers to pour in. And then we're going to bring this temperature up to 156 degrees. Let me get back to that temperature range. That was our 5th one. This is our last one. 156 degrees is going to give you more of that full body flavor. Your bigger beers, your wee heavies, your stouts, your porters, your barley wines, you're going to want that full body flavor because they're typically more, I don't know, I don't want to say boozy always, but they're typically your higher percentage beers, and you want a full body mouthfeel and flavor to these beers. So you're going to need that 156 degrees mashing temperature. Typically your medium body beers are around, you're mashing in around 152, and then your light body beers, your lagers, your pilsners, things like that, you're looking at around 148 to 150. So we're gonna turn our heat on here, and we got our thermometer in there, and we're gonna let this water get up to 156 degrees, and then we're gonna turn our heat down because we want to hold that temperature at 156 degrees for about 20 minutes while our grains are steeping in there. So let's get this up to 156 degrees, and then I'll show you what we're gonna do with our steeping grains for 20 minutes. Okay, so I did mention that I was going to add in a Campton tablet to my water to help balance out some of that chlorine that is in your local tap water. If you don't have a Campton tablet, not a big deal. We're brewing a very small batch of this beer. You're probably not going to notice the difference, especially this beer on a recipe is going to be close to 10% ABV. It's going to have a huge malt-forward flavor and aroma to it, so you're probably not going to notice that chlorine in your tap water, depending on what you're brewing and where you're brewing, I should say, your local tap water. We're here in Hudsonville, Michigan at Outside the Box Brewing Company, my local home brewery. I have the water profile for my city. Typically what I do is I add in a Campton tablet or 2 if I'm brewing a bigger batch, like if I'm brewing 5 or 10 gallons of beer. Up to 10 gallons, I'll use 2 of these Campton tablets. For 5 gallons or 2 gallons, I use 1. And I also add in a tiny bit of 85% phosphoric acid as well to my water profile. That I have a very smart engineering friend who's gotten into water chemistry. He looked at the water profile and he broke it down and he said, Steve, this is what you should do for your water profile if you want to. Again, I've always done this for the 11 years that I've brewed. So what I do is I take one of these little Campton tablets. I've got 2 spoons here. I put it in between 2 spoons, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rock this gently back and forth and crush this tablet up just like you would do with any medication or whatnot. So you crush that up into a fine powder, and we're just going to sprinkle that right into our water as we're heating it up. I'm going to dip our spoons in there and stir it around to make sure we got that all off, and that's it. So that Campton tablet is going to be right into our base water profile here, and that's going to help eliminate some of those chlorine flavors out of our tap water. Again, if you don't have the Campton tablet, it's not that big a deal. I don't think you'll notice the difference, but again, I've been brewing for over a decade, so I've always done this, and my beers have always come out really well. So that's what I do. So let's get this up to 156 degrees, and then we'll steep in those character grains. All right, so we got our grain all milled up, and what that milling process does, it takes those little pieces of grain, goes through the mill, through the rollers, and it cracks those husks open, which exposes that natural sugar on the inside of the grains and breaks those open, and it gives you that powdery, dusty consistency to the grain. I got it here in my grain sack. I put it in carefully and I tied off the top. So we got our water up to our 156 degrees, is right where we want it. We're going to turn that temperature down a little bit because we want it now to hold at 156 degrees for the next 20 minutes. I don't know, you could do a half an hour if you wanted to be safe. But what we're going to do is we're going to steep this grain bag in there. All of those milled grains, we want that water to get inside there and kind of break up all those grains. We don't want any of those dough balls in there. We want those grains to be fully saturated into that water. So as we're steeping this in, you can see the water here. Hopefully you can see it's getting kind of cloudy, and it's going to add in that color, that flavor. You're going to start to get that aroma. I always kind of compare it to like grape nut cereal. That's not a hugely popular cereal to a lot of people out there, but I don't know. I enjoy eating grape nuts as a cereal, and when I smell this this grain being steeped into that 156 degree water, it imparts that aroma to me, which always kind of reminiscent of grape nut cereal. So I'm just going to take a little clip here and attach it to the side of my water. The other thing you can do is you could take a spoon and throughout the process here, just kind of stir this 156 degree water around a little bit, just making sure that those grains are fully saturated. And over the next 20 minutes to half an hour, this water is going to be basically just stripping those sugars off of those grains and imparting a little bit of that sugar content to our water, but we're going to add the rest of our base malt, that liquid malt extract, in to raise up the rest of our sugar content to give us that full sugar content for when we boil, to give us that beginning base to our beer before we add in our yeast to ferment it. So we're going to let this steep at 156 degrees for about 20 to 30 minutes, and I'll show you an up close picture of what our base water looks like now before we boil with that beautiful color. All right, let's let this go for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll head on to the next step. All right, there's our timer going off for the end of our 20 minutes. I'm going to stop our timer there. We're going to take our heat on our stove and we're going to crank it all the way up, because now our steeping grains, we need to add in our liquid malt extract. We need to bring this up to a boil so that we can add in our hops. Now, what you want to make sure you do is you want to take these grains, these steeping grains, out of your boil kettle now, because we steeped them at 156 degrees to rinse off all those sugars, but you do not want to leave them in the pot as you're bringing it up to boil. At a certain temperature, when these grains get too hot, I think 170 and above, that starts to release some off flavors, some tannins, and some things that you don't want in your beer. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this off. Obviously, these grains have been soaking for 20 minutes, so they are completely saturated. But there is still some good liquid draining off of this bag. So I'm just going to kind of set this off to the side. Use my clip here maybe. I don't know if we can get this rigged up here on my cupboard and clip this down and just let this drain out. Because we're going to use this liquid and we're going to throw it right back in there. You know, we're not going to waste anything. We are Dutch and we are home brewers, and we are going to let all this out. I don't want to squeeze on the bag and do all of that. I don't need that much liquid out of it, but whatever drains out of that bag, we will add in. Now, as this pot is heating up to 212 degrees to boil, we're going to take our liquid malt extract, and I've got it soaking right now in some hot water, because that liquid malt extract, if you remember, it is very sticky, and if you don't heat it up first, you'll have a bear of a time spooning that out and getting that all mixed in. So let it soak in some hot water while this is coming up to boil. Soaks in hot water 5-10 minutes. It'll loosen it up, and it'll be so much easier to stir in when we're ready to start boiling. All right, that'll be our next step. Here is an up close look at our steeping grain water. So we steeped those grains for 20 minutes, and look at that beautiful color that got imparted into our initial strike water. All right, so we're bringing this up to a boil now, and then we'll be adding in our liquid malt extract. So our SRM, or our color of our beer, is looking to be spot on right now. All right, as you can see, we are starting to just get a little gentle roll of a boil started here in our boil kettle. So we got to add in the rest of our steeping grain wort and our liquid malt extract. Before we do that, we're going to turn the heat off. We're going to cut the heat completely because when we add in that liquid malt extract, we don't want direct flame on the bottom of the pot because some of that syrupy liquid will burn and scald at the bottom of the pot. But again, before we even do any of that, our best friend, our saving grace, especially when we're brewing on our kitchen stove, is FirmCap. FirmCap is a defoamer. Once you start boiling this sugary liquid, this wort, it is gonna foam up and boil over in a heartbeat, and you will have a giant mess on your hands. So take this FirmCap, the best $2.50 you will ever spend as a brewer. Put about, I don't know, 8 to 10 drops in there. That might be a little excessive, probably 5 or 6 would work. But that is gonna keep it from foaming and boiling over. So we cut our heat, we put our FirmCap in. We're gonna take our leftover liquid that we let drain. We're gonna take our grains here and just put them in the sink. We'll be throwing those grains in the trash and then cleaning out that bag. But we did end up with, I don't know, 4 ounces or so of extra liquid. We don't wanna waste that. We're gonna put that in the pot. And now we have our liquid malt extract that we have been soaking in hot water, so it should be nice and loose. We're going to take our stainless steel spoon and we are going to take this glorious syrupy liquid and look at that, pour that right in. And as we pour it in, we want to stir it in and get that saturated and mixed in completely with our wort. Okay, you don't want to pour this directly to the bottom without stirring because again, that syrup will collect on the bottom of the pot. And when you turn that heat back on and you got that direct flame on the bottom of the pot, it is going to burn and scald that syrup and you're gonna get this charcoaly burnt flavor in your beer at the end. Again, I know this because just like all home brewers, we learn from making mistakes, and I did that once. I ruined a whole entire batch of beer. Did I throw it away? No. I powered through it. I still drank it. But it was not a pleasant flavor that I was going for in my beer. Needless to say, I didn't share any of that beer with friends because it was a mistake. So I didn't want to do that. But I'm just using a spatula right now, and I'm scraping away, trying to get as much of that syrup out of that container. I'm going to add in the second one. Again, we've got 6 pounds, 6 ounces. So about 6.5 pounds of this liquid malt extract. Now this extract is called Golden Light. And as you see me pouring it in, it doesn't look golden or light at all. That is what happens when you're using liquid malt extract. There's only about, I don't know, 6 to 10 maybe varieties of liquid malt extract. So you're really at the mercy of the color. You have no way of controlling the color of your beer if you're just using this liquid malt extract. That is why I said earlier that most brewers eventually will go to all grain. You don't have to. Again, you can make great beers just using this liquid malt extract. But again, you're going to be limited on what you can make and the flavors that you can impart because, again, there's only 6 to 10 different liquid malt extracts to use. And if you're trying to make a really nice light Pilsen or lager beer, it's going to be almost impossible because the stuff is just so dark. It's concentrated sugar in a syrup form. And this almost looks caramel or red to me already, which goes perfect for this Scottish Wee Heavy because that's the color we're looking for anyway. So I'm not worried about that at all for this recipe. But if I was making a different beer, I probably wouldn't be using this liquid malt extract because it's too dark. All right, before I turn the heat back on, I'm gonna, again, make sure this is all dissolved in the liquid. I'm gonna pull up my spoon from the bottom And I'm gonna look on the bottom of my spoon to make sure that there's none of that syrup on the end of my spoon. If I don't see any syrup on the end of my spoon as I'm scraping the bottom of the pot, then I know it is all dissolved and stirred in there very well, and I won't have any burning. So that is good to go. We're gonna turn our heat back on. We're gonna blast it full blast, and we're gonna let this come to a boil. Once we start seeing it with a nice rolling boil, then we're gonna add in our 60-minute bittering hops. And then we'll start our timer, and we'll have an hour until the end where we have to chill and get it in our fermenter. All right, let's let it go. All right, as you can see, we got a nice boil going on our beer. All right, so we are ready to add in our bittering hops. Keep your heat on your stove cranked up as high as possible. You want as vigorous of a boil as you can possibly get. The more vigorous that you can get your wort to boil, the better off it will be in the end. And that all comes down to how hot your burners are and how much gas you can get out of your stove. So we're gonna add in 1 ounce of East Kent Golding hops. Today, instead of sprinkling the hops directly in, which you totally can do, which most people do, I am going to be using a hop tube. So this is basically a dry hop tube. I use this when I'm dry hopping my IPAs, my pale ales, anytime I want to add dry hops into a beer in secondary. I also like to use this little tube when I'm making an extract batch on the stove. It has a very fine micron filter, which is going to allow all the oils and the acids from the hops to come out into the beer, but it's going to hold back all of that hop trube, that hop material, so that at the end, when we're chilling our beer and we're transferring it into our fermenter, we're going to be able to leave a lot of that junk behind. Now, there are varying opinions out there about using hop spiders or hop tubes and things like that. Some people think that, it takes away from the hop content that gets actually into the beer. I've used them all the time, and again, for this beer, you're not looking for a big hop presence in this beer anyway. This is just to kind of balance the beer out so it's not overly malty and sweet, but you're not going to be drinking this beer and being like, oh wow, those hops are amazing in this beer. It's really to balance the beer out. So I am going to try to keep it easy on myself by keeping it as clean and neat as possible. So it's going to allow me less work at the end. Now, as you can see, you can definitely tell that the hops are being added into this beer. They are going through this tube very well, very easy. The oils and the acids are extracting right through that filter in this, because you can see whenever you add hops in, you're going to get that initial boil up as well, just like you would when you started boiling the wort. So I'm going to take this, and I've got a little fishing line on the side of it, and I'm going to make sure it's submerged, but I'm just going to clip that to the side of my pot, like so, and my hops are in there. The rolling boil is working. I'm going to set my timer for 45 minutes, not an hour, because my next step will be with 15 minutes to go in the boil. So I set my timer to 45 minutes. I know when the timer goes off, I'll be ready for my next step. In the meantime, I'm not just going to go and sit down and drink beer and wait for 45 minutes. I'm always going to be thinking about the next step. What do I need to do to prepare for the next step in 45 minutes? I know I'm going to be adding in a Whirlfloc tablet. That's ready to go. I know I'm going to be adding in my yeast nutrient. That's already ready to go. At 10 minutes to go in the boil, I'm going to add another ounce of hops. So I'll pull this tube out, take the top off, add another ounce of hops, let that boil for 10 minutes. Those are the easy steps. What you need to really prepare now is get your fermentator, or your fermenter sanitized and ready to go. Get your wort chiller sanitized and ready to go if you're going to use one. So over here in the sink, I got my copper wort chiller that I'm going to be using to chill my beer down with. If you don't have one of these, obviously you can go the old school route and just make a big ice bath and take your whole pot and cool it down that way. It's going to take a lot longer. It's probably going to take 45 minutes to an hour to cool it that way. Using a wort chiller like this, it is a great tool to spend a little extra money on. I don't know what those go for, 50, 60, 70 bucks, but you're going to hook that. I'm going to hook that up to cold water in my garage. I'm going to stir that around, and I'm going to chill this beer down to 67 degrees in about 5 minutes. That's a lot less time. And the faster you can chill your beer from boiling down to fermentation temperatures, again, the better it is for the beer and the yeast to start doing their work. So, got my star saying, I'm going to sanitize and clean everything that is going to be touching this beer as soon as I turn that heat off. So, being a brewer isn't just glorious work. It's not just making beer and sitting around and drinking beer. A lot of the time you're cleaning and you're sanitizing, because if you skip any of these important steps, you're going to end up with a off flavor or bad tasting beer. And we don't want that. We're spending a lot of time putting a lot of care and effort into this beer. We want to make sure everything turns out just the way we want it. So let's get to work and let's go from brewer to janitor. There is our 45-minute timer. That means we're going to add in our Whirlfloc tablet, and we're going to add in some yeast nutrient. Yeast nutrient, usually what I do is I just kind of fill up the cap. Again, this is a small 2-gallon batch, so we probably don't need all of this yeast nutrient. Some people don't use yeast nutrient at all because the grains nowadays are so well milled and all of that good stuff. And kilned and whatever they got all the good stuff in them. So I don't know. I always add it in. The better environment that I can have for my yeast to do their job, I don't mind spending a couple extra bucks to use it every once in a while. So 5 minutes back on the timer because we got to add in 1 more ounce of hops in 5 minutes for the final 10 minutes of our boil. We're almost ready to get this beer off the heat and chilled down. All right, 5 minutes are up. We have 10 minutes left in our boil. We're going to add 10 minutes on the clock. What we need to do now is we need to add in 1 more ounce of East Kent Goldings. I am putting on my superhero green gloves from Blickman because we got to pull out this hop tube, which has been sitting in boiling wort for the last 50 minutes, and it's going to be scalding hot. So I'm going to take this out, take the top off carefully. If you don't have these gloves, find something else if you're using a hop tube like this because this thing is boiling hot. Got our East Kent Goldings, 1 more ounce. Oh, it smells glorious. We're only going to boil these ones for about 10 minutes. So we're not getting a whole lot of bitterness out of them. Late hop additions in the boil are going to impart more aroma and flavor than they are bitterness. We got all of our bitterness, our IBUs as they're called, out of that 60-minute boil. So we're going to stir these around. We should see those new hops foam up here a little bit, hopefully, in our hop tube. So for about 10 minutes or so, you know what? I think I'm just going to let that float in there all by itself. All right, that should be fine. For the last 10 minutes, add that little bit of liquid in there. Again, we don't waste anything here at Outside the Box Brewing Company. Every ounce is as important as the other. We're going to hit start. We got 10 minutes left in our boil. We got our fermenter all sanitized. We have, I am not cooking anything for 10 minutes. We are using the timer for 10 minutes. There we go. We got our fermenter sanitized. We got our wort chiller sanitized. As soon as this 10 minutes is up, we're going to pull that hop tube out. We're going to cut the heat. We're going to bring this out in the garage, and we are going to chill this down to 67 degrees so we can pitch our yeast. Timer just went off. We are at the end of our boil. We are going to turn the heat off, and we are almost home free. So let's get our glove back on because we got to reach in and grab that hop tube out. Scalding hot. Oh yeah, we're gonna it's even hot through the glove. We're gonna put this in a bowl so I don't burn my hand. We're gonna let that drain off a little bit. The other thing we're gonna keep our glove on for is I wanna get a sample reading because we wanna check the gravity in this. So typically what I would do is I would use a a thief or something to get the wort out to put in here, but since I got my glove on, I'm just going to dip it in. Fill it up to about there. As you can see, it is steaming hot. We're going to put this in some ice cold water here because we got to chill that. Liquid down to 70 degrees or so before we put our hydrometer in there to get an accurate reading. It needs to be at temp. So we're going to let that chill down on its own. But in the meantime, we're going to take our boil kettle now and we're going to take it out to the garage. We got our wort chiller hooked up. We're going to turn the water on from the faucet and we're going to chill this 212 degree wort down to 67 degrees to the optimal pitching temperature for our yeast. So let's go chill this beer down and look for the Coldbreak. All right, here we are at our chilling station in the garage. We got our wort chiller hooked up to the faucet coming from outside. Now, typically what happens is we got ice cold water running through this copper coil. Copper works very well with transferring heat. So we got ice cold water running through the copper coils. We're going to put it in the wort and we're going to shake and move this around. And as I'm doing that, I can feel, that's why I'm wearing these gloves still, I can feel the heat being transferred out to the discharge tube, which I have clamped here, going down into the sink. So I want to make sure that these fittings are nice and tight. We don't want any hose water going into our beer. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to shake the living bleep out of this. Two good things are happening right now. I'm adding a lot of oxygen into the wort. Oxygen is a great thing pre-fermentation. You want an oxygen-rich environment for the yeast when they're doing their fermentation. Once fermentation is complete, we want zero oxygen. We don't want any oxidation in our beer. But prior to pitching yeast, you want lots of oxygen in that wort because the yeast need that oxygen-rich environment to do their work. So we are going to shake and shake and shake and shake until we can get this beer chilled down to our pitching temperatures. Okay? So typically, the colder the water you have coming out of your faucet, the faster you will be able to chill this beer down. It is about a 90-degree day in the middle of the summer right now. So I don't have super ice cold water coming out of my faucet outside. So this might take a little longer than normal, but still, it's going to be a heck of a lot faster than just setting this in a tub full of ice water. That'll take an hour at least. So I'm going to continue to shake this around, add oxygen into it, and then we'll take a temperature reading, and we'll see if we're ready to transfer it to our fermenter. All right, we've been shaking this for about 10 minutes now. I'm going to take a reading here with my temp gun, and we are at 69 degrees. Close enough. I don't think we're going to get much lower than that because, like I said, it's the middle of summer. It's 90 degrees outside, and the water coming out of the faucet isn't what you would call ice cold. So if you're making this beer in the winter and you got 45 to 50 degree water coming out of your temp or out of your tap, you're going to chill this beer in no time, 3 to 5 minutes at the max. Took us about 10 minutes, twice as long, but we're good. We're where we need to be. So we are going to take out our wort chiller. We're just going to set this over in this sink. And now we are going to transfer our wort into our fermenter. I also sanitized a strainer. So I'm going to carefully set this up. Now, since we use that hop tube, I don't think we're going to see a lot of material, a lot of excess material left behind in this beer. I don't have a really good way of doing this. I think right there is going to be the best. We shouldn't see a lot of hop tube. Now, I don't have to worry about my gloves anymore because we're down to 69 degrees, so it's not hot anymore. Even the bottom of the pot is nice and cool. So I'm going to carefully pour this into my fermenter right through that strainer. Again, this is where we don't want to spill any of the beer, but as it's pouring in there, we want it to splash around. We want that nice bubble up, that oxygen-rich environment for our yeast. This beer is looking glorious in color. We have that nice ruby red, almost light brown, caramely type of color coming through. And let me show you what I mean about using that hop tube. All right, this is exactly why I use the hop tube. Here is my strainer. Barely anything left, any hop material or anything that I strained off from my boil kettle. If I would have just dumped those hops directly in, it would have been an absolute mess in this strainer. And a lot of people don't even use a strainer. They just pour it right into the fermenter, and they got all of that stuff in there. So again, throughout brewing multiple times and many hundreds of batches, you'll find your niche, you'll find your process. This is just what I do because I'm trying to make it easier for myself in keeping as clean, clear, commercial looking beers at the end of the day. So here is our fermenter. We're going to bring this back inside. We're going to pitch our yeast. We're going to put our airlock on top, and then we are going to take a gravity reading and get this into our fermentation fridge at 67 degrees, and we're going to let it ferment for about 2 weeks. Let's go inside. So our beer is completely chilled down to 69 degrees. When we put it in our fermentation fridge is already set at 67, so it'll drop a couple more degrees so we can ferment it at 67 degrees. As you can tell, I don't know if you can see, if you zoomed in here, you can see the cold break that happened. All of those proteins and everything kind of coagulating and clumping together. That's what we want to see when we go from that 212 degree boil down to our 69 degree fermentation temperatures. So we got our sample here. We chilled this down. We're going to take our hydrometer. We're going to drop it in there. Our recipe says our original gravity should be about 1.1. 1.1. That's a very high gravity starting. But again, this is a Scottish wee heavy. This is a boozy beer to begin with. And wow, as you can see, look at that hydrometer sticking way out. I will turn this the best I can, and I will come and get the camera and zoom in. I'm seeing 1.14. 114. That is a super high gravity. Zoom in there and see that right there. 1.14. Typically when you're making a beer, you are sitting at about 1.05, 1.50 for about a 5% beer. So if this beer turns out the way it's supposed to, and we finish our final gravity is going to be at about 1.22 or 1.22. It's going to be a little on the sweeter side. Again, this is a maltier, malt-forward beer, so it's going to be a little on the sweeter side, but it's still going to finish at over 12% ABV. This is going to be a perfect beer to add in some oak characteristics to. Now, we don't have to barrel age it by actually putting it in a barrel. I'm going to share some tips and tricks of how you can get all that oak flavor and barrel aging flavor into this beer without actually using a barrel. So I'll show you that after this beer is fermented for the next 2 weeks. But I want to share another tool that I like to use. I don't always use a hydrometer. I'm using it here for this video to show you the numbers because you can't see the numbers with this. This is called a refractometer. It does the same thing. It's going to give you your original gravity readings, but instead of filling up a whole graduated cylinder and chilling it down and adding that in, you literally just need a couple drops. And you're going to take a couple drops of that wort and you're going to put it right on there and put the lid down. And then what you do is you look right through this and you look at the light and it will tell you your gravity reading. There it is, 1.114. So it matches up. I like sometimes using both of these just to make sure that this is calibrated correctly. But yeah, 1.114, it's right on. Obviously you can't see the number. by looking through this. But this is another cool tool to buy. I prefer to use this because you just use a couple drops and you get your reading much faster. The downside to this is you can't get a final gravity reading. Once the beer has fermented through, a refractometer will only measure the amount of residual sugar at the beginning before fermentation. I made that mistake because I fermented through, took a sample reading, and it was still at the same. And I was like, what is going on? Is this thing broken? Then I did some research and I realized it's only good for original gravity readings. So you still have to use your hydrometer if you're looking for that final gravity reading. So after we pitch this yeast, let it ferment. I'm gonna let it ferment for 2 weeks. This is a big beer. It's gonna take a while for that yeast to eat through that sugar. We're in no hurry because again, we're gonna be drinking this beer in about 3 months from now, okay? So we're in no rush to get it out. So we're gonna let it take its time, ferment through. Hopefully it gets down to that 1022, 1020 something rating, and then we'll end up with a 12% beer, and then we'll have some fun with some oak flavor in secondary. So we got our scissors sanitized. We got our yeast packet sanitized. Again, we only have 2 gallons of beer here. So typically, if I was brewing a 5-gallon batch of this beer, I would definitely be adding 2 yeast packets in. But for 2 gallons, you usually only need a third of one of these yeast packets. There's 11.5 grams of yeast, a couple 100 billion cells of yeast. So we're gonna use the whole entire packet. We're gonna sprinkle that in. Again, I sanitize the packet and I sanitize the scissors that I just cut it open with. Again, you cannot be too careful when doing this stuff. So take 2 seconds to sanitize your yeast packet and your scissors. We're gonna seal this baby up. We got our airlock on top. So once that yeast starts fermenting those sugars, the byproduct is gonna be carbon dioxide. It's gonna be pushing it through. It's gonna be bubbling up like that. I'm gonna give it a little gentle swirl here just to kind of get a little bit more of that yeast in there. And that yeast has a massive meal ahead of it. 1.14 original gravity starting. There's a shit ton of sugar in this beer, and that yeast is going to convert all that sugar into alcohol. We're going to end up with a 12% Scottish Wee Heavy winter warmer that we're going to barrel age and add some oak flavor to it too. This beer is going to be phenomenal. I'll see you back in a couple weeks. We'll take a gravity reading to see if we're fully fermented through, and then I'll show you those cool tricks on how to add some oak flavor into this beer. See you soon.